Okay, great. So I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Alan Levitan. I'm what we call the lead consultant here at VLV. And that means that I work with many of the consultants, particularly the newer ones coming on board. And also I do the matching so that you students getting together with the consultants is something that we do right at the beginning. And I hope that's really working out well. From everything that I've heard, I think that it is. A little bit about my military background. It starts with Army ROTC. Then I did my basic training in Virginia. And then some of you may recall this, when it comes time to get your assignments, everybody goes around what was then the bulletin board. And so others were saying, hey, I'm going to Bragg, I'm going to Dix, I'm going to Benning. I got the assignment to go to Two Rock Ranch Station. Two Rock Ranch Station. A station is well below a post, a camp, and probably every other Army designation. Nobody knew what Two Rock Ranch Station was nor where it was. No one in my basic training. So I finally found out it was in California someplace. And I went out there, and it turns out that it's an Army security agency installation. And it's somewhere, this was secret at the time, somewhere between Petaluma, California and the Pacific Ocean. And so I went out there, and being a station, it was tiny, really tiny. It was so small, and there were so few officers that I was the property book officer, the motor pool officer, and the commissary officer all at the same time, which was fun because I learned a lot. Oh, by the way, the mission of the station was tracking and intercepting communications from Russian subs that were in the Pacific Ocean. And I think 20 years after I got out, I wasn't able to tell anybody that for fear of getting killed. But I feel now that it's been a long enough time that I can tell you what the mission was. So I mentioned commissary officer. That led to my business career. I was in the supermarket business in the Boston area and then in New Jersey for many, many years. My last assignment was at King Supermarkets as its CEO. I'm now retired, but like a lot of the consultants, work as a consultant in the business world. And I'm on the board of a food manufacturer, and I'm on the board of several nonprofits. So to get started, I want to ask you a question, and you can use the chat box to answer. So Sue, the next slide. Name an entity that has a vision and a mission. And we'll just check it out on the chat box. There's 5, but I don't think that was for me.
It's I see one that Apple, USO, McDonald's,
Here we go. Yeah.
Project.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So let's go to the next slide and name something that has core values.
Army.
What do we have so far? The
Army.
Yeah.
Air Force, college, USA.
My wife.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks. On the next slide, I'm going to show you a mission statement because I asked about mission and core values. This is one particular one. We fight hunger and poverty in New Jersey by assisting those in need and seeking long-term solutions. And there's more to it than that. And I want to point out the last 3 words at the bottom, which is food, help, and hope. And that sort of captures everything in a nutshell. This is called a tagline. A lot of you may know what that means. And it's also would also be part of the logo of this particular organization. And on the next slide, on core values, this is also what some call guiding principles. And in this case, it's Morris Art's guiding principles, including belief that the arts are vital, so forth and so on. And up at the top, building vibrant communities through the arts is, in this organization's case, its logo and its tagline. So we had a lot of good answers on the chat box. If you haven't guessed by now what my subject is, it's on the next slide. And it is, nonprofits are businesses too. We should all be interested in nonprofits. Not only are there always students in our classes who want to open and build a nonprofit, but I think everybody should be interested because, first of all, vets care. And I believe that once you're successful in the for-profit businesses that you're going to go into, and I think you're going to be successful, you're the type people that will give back. You can volunteer, you can assume leadership roles, and you can even join nonprofit boards. I'm on 4 nonprofit boards presently, and I just love every bit of it. So as it says here, nonprofits must operate like a business because they are. They are businesses, and they must at least break even to survive. And in order to survive, they can fulfill their mission. Nonprofits can be large and small. The first one that I was showing you is the Community Food Bank of New Jersey. This is a $100 million business, which makes it one of the largest businesses in New Jersey, whether we're talking nonprofit or for-profit. A lot of nonprofits are small. A lot of the ones that you are interested in bringing to life are small. They always start small. Food Bank started with one woman who founded it and delivered food in her station wagon. So we start small. You can have all volunteers, no paid staff. You could have one staff member, which is probably what a lot of you are planning to do. So they vary considerably. Let's go on to the next slide. What I want you to do is, as we progress, look for similarities between nonprofits and for-profit businesses, because if I'm right, and they are businesses, then there should be a lot of similarities. Let's start with the constituents, like who makes up the nonprofits? Well, there's a board of directors, which would be the same as a for-profit business. There are staff members. Businesses usually call these folks employees, but they're the same. Volunteers and donors, the next two I'll take together. They are unique to nonprofits. We don't have this in the for-profit business world. Volunteers are very important. They're really the backbone of a nonprofit organization. They are so in terms of their numbers and in terms of their commitment. So we always like to get volunteers involved. They work for nothing, but they do it because they're really committed to your mission. And donors, it's all about revenue. You really can't survive in any business without revenue. And I'm going to show you how donors are so important to nonprofits in just a minute. And users of programs, products, I will add, and services. If you think about this in terms of the for-profit world, these would be your customers. So how well you execute this area will tell us pretty easily if we're going to achieve our mission. Next, I'll just show you a typical organization chart. So looks this way in most organizations, business or for-profit or nonprofit. So yep, there's a board of directors. There's usually a president and or a CEO, some administrative assistants. And then down on the bottom, forget about impact leader because it was specific to an organization. That's not typical, but think about it. Your VP finance, your VP human resources, your VP operations, and your VP programs. For programs, I would associate that with a sales and marketing VP in a for-profit. And I did skip over VP resource development because that's the one that's different. That's the one where you're going to work on your revenue through your donors. So that would be one difference between the profits and the nonprofits. Let's go into what the financial picture looks like. So usually it's revenue minus expenses equals income or net income. So here we say revenue minus expenses equals non-operating change. So we're looking for change in our in what we achieve. Surplus in a for-profit business would be profit, and deficit would be your losses. If you're lucky enough to have a surplus, you really have to determine how best to use it. And if you have a deficit, you really can't have a deficit for very long or you won't last. It's really as simple as that. The next one, cash flow, like in any business, you really have to watch it very carefully. And reserve calculation, this is a little bit different. A reserve calculation is a calculation of how many weeks and or months that you can survive in your reserves. In other words, without any revenue coming in. As a rule of thumb, the best practice goal is you need about 6 months of reserve in order to take care of any and all situations. But in all honesty, I must tell you that in almost all nonprofit situations, it's less. But you do have to save for a rainy day. Non-restricted versus restricted. This is different. A lot of non-restricted is it goes into operating gifts and grants go into operating expenses, into operating income, and you can use it any way that you need to. Restricted funds would be if a donor says that what he or she is giving you, or if a company restricts, then what they're saying is that you can only use it for a certain purpose. And so when you come up against some real tough times, you are not technically able to use restricted funds. So that can be a problem. You want to get as much income into your nonprofit through non-restricted giving as possible. And your balance sheet is really like a for-profit. I'm just saying, and you should know that you have a balance sheet in a nonprofit as well. Revenue components. There are two main sources for revenue. One is grants and one is gifts or donations. The tip here on grants comes from corporations and from government. And you really should have a good grant writer who understands the process, because there's a lot of uniqueness to it, and may in fact have good connections in government and in corporations. Look, if you're starting off, and you're obviously going to be the grant writer, but I'm just pointing out that it's a really important part of your organization and an important part of how you get revenue. The rest are donors, or I have events at the end. So individual donors, nationally, amongst all nonprofits, this is the largest giving group. So just individuals who, are interested in giving. You must get good contributions from your board. In fact, from going back to grants for a minute, you must have 100% giving representation on your board in order to be considered for grants. Now, we're not saying what that amount should be, but everyone on your board has to give in order for you to be eligible for grants. Plus, it's the right thing to do. They believe in the mission, and so they should be giving. So what are we talking about in terms of dollars? Well, some organizations say to a board member, we want you to be giving to us as one of your top 3 gifts that you make. Others use a statement, something like commensurate with your financial ability, because, you know, everybody isn't in the same position at the same time. And then there's also board giving, which is called give and get. And it's sometimes a requirement. So giving means you give on your own, and get means that you go out and you help the organization get money from others, from either individual donors or from corporations. Then there's corporate gifts. And what I like to say here is ask and you shall receive. Don't ask ... So you got to get out there and you've got to pay attention and you've got to ask.
Alan?
Yeah.
There was one question, not a question, but a comment that was made, if you want to comment on it. Lisa mentioned that not all nonprofits will qualify for grants. The majority are for 501c3s.
Yeah. Yeah, and yes, that's true. And the reason I mentioned having someone who really knows all about grants is for that reason, so they'll know, you know, what to do, where to go, and what to do, and to not waste their time on things that just aren't going to happen. And similarly with corporate gifts, it's really important that you know if that corporation believes in your mission and is willing to appropriate money annually to your cause. You know, I mentioned the food bank earlier. There are corporations that don't give for poverty and for feeding people. I mean, they have another mission, they have interests in other organizations. So you might as well not bother, but you need to understand and look up and spend the time to know who is your potential. Events is there at the bottom. You know, these are how you get sponsorships. This is in ticket sales. But one thing I want to mention about events that isn't true of the others, and that is that you only get to take home your net after expenses. So what I mean by that is when there are events, there's usually a cost to holding events. Maybe it's a place you rent. Maybe it's a speaker that you have to give an honorarium to. Whatever it is, you may take in $10,000, but you might have $4,000 in expenses. So just understand that and do the math, because I've been involved in events where when we stopped and we really looked at what we were doing, you know, we might have had $10,000 in revenue and $11,000 in expenses. Well, obviously that doesn't work. It's not going to help your organization. And in terms of, you know, how you get money, you really need to cultivate relationships before you do an ask. You know, just think about that. If someone comes to you and they say, you know, we need $100 for this or that. No, you need to cultivate them first. You have to talk to them. You have to understand who they are, what they do, why they might be willing to give. And the other thing, once you've done that, is you need to tell your story. And usually the best way to do that is in personal terms, like, why are you interested in this organization? Why did you start it? Or why are you on the board of an organization? And then just a little nice catchphrase about telling your story is brag, don't beg. Brag, don't beg. So people don't want you to tell them, you know, we're in terrible shape and we need your money and blah, blah, blah. Sounds funny, but a lot of people, a lot of organizations do that. Your best option is to brag about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and why you're doing a great job, and why you need their money, and why and how you're going to spend it. People need to know that. So let's go into expense components. This is pretty straightforward. On programs and service costs, I mentioned making sure that you know revenue versus expense. So on this line, I would say you need to allocate related staff salaries and other costs to measure the true cost of each program. So you may have multiple programs. it doesn't mean if you're losing money on a particular program that you should stop doing that program. No, the mission of the organization might really dictate that you need that program. But if you have several programs, they all can't be losers. And you just need to know up front by measuring which programs are delivering you what types of revenue. Other supporting costs, you know, you've got admin, you've got fixed expenses like rent, you've got depreciation. Fund development and marketing are different, and I'll combine those two. This is the cost to reach people, to cultivate people, like I just mentioned, and to ask for, to actually do the ask. So that's different. And yes, you do need some expense in this area. If you don't market, you're not going to get your message out there. If you don't really spend time on fund development and hire someone to do that when you get to the size where you can, you're always going to struggle with revenue. So, you know, are nonprofits businesses? So far, I would have to say, yes, they are. They look an awful lot like businesses to me. On the next slide, I want to give you some takeaways. Again, I'm really not only targeting nonprofit business ideas and nonprofit students in this class and in future classes, but to encourage all of us to give back financially when we can, when we're able to. Not only financially, but volunteering time, what we call time and talent. You know, so your capacity to spend time doing things, and your talent, another word would be expertise. Because, you know, someday you're going to be in a position to do this, and I hope and I really believe that you will. So, keys to success: fulfilling your mission. I mentioned some mission statements earlier, like fighting hunger and poverty and building communities through the arts. You need to develop your own mission statement, and then you have to work hard to achieve it. The next one: provide programs, goods, and services. And this could be a lot of nonprofits are service oriented, but there are often tangible items, like in my food bank example, you know, actually giving food and giving clothing. So it can be goods in addition to programs and services. These are often giveaways, so the organization collects them. In some cases needs to pay for them, but the best way is to give it away free of charge. And when that's not possible, they would do it at a cost, but a very subsidized cost, probably at the cost it's costing the organization. What's better than motherhood and apple pie when I say that you must differentiate and be the best at what you do? Trust me, you have competition. If not other nonprofit competitors, you're in competition for the available donations, the available dollars, because people can't give to everything. So trust me, you need to be the best, and that's how you're going to achieve your goals. And reaching more people and maintaining your existing customers or clients are very, very important. I think those are two of the ways to best achieve your mission. And I know I'm saying the word mission a lot, but it's really important. And it's important, it's just as important in a for-profit business than a non. The last one is interesting. I often hear people say, you know, I started a nonprofit because I'm not in it for the money. That is wonderful. Some people either don't need the money, or, you know, they're so committed that they're willing to live at a lower sort of economic scale because they feel that this is so important. But I do want to stress that you have to have revenue, or else you can't cover your expenses. And if you can't cover your expenses, then you're just not going to be in business that long. So again, I'm stressing it. It's very, very important. the next couple of slides actually came from one of our consultants a couple of cohorts ago, and it's just kind of a quick and dirty way of asking key questions that sort of frame your organization and frame your reason for being, like why you're going to be in this business. So vision, what is your vision of a better world? And the word 3 lines down is aspirational. And this is very important. Some visions are never achieved. They're not totally achieved. And that's because they're so aspirational. But if they're not aspirational, then they're not big and broad enough. And so they really need to be. And the question that you would ask yourself, and I really would urge you to put the answers down on paper, is my vision is to create a world where, and then put down what your mission and vision, what your vision is. And then down below, you have to bring in your mission. How will you fulfill that vision? And that begs the question, I will create a world where, and you state your vision by achieving your mission. The next slide talks about your shareholders. In this case, I would say your donors and your clients being your end users. And the question is, who are you trying to help? Like, who are your shareholders, your stakeholders? That's important so that you can target your marketing and your other approaches to bringing in the dollars that are going to help you survive. And then the last question is like, why does your nonprofit exist? So you really want to spend time, and I think in writing would really be key. So next slide, last slide, we're kind of back to where we started. I hope I answered some of your questions, and we have time to take some now. And I hope I've stimulated interest in nonprofits, not only for those of you who want to go into them, but also those of you who want to volunteer in the future. And I guess if I haven't been crystal clear, you really need to treat your nonprofit like a business, because it is.